Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another inner hour. We're still in the Understanding the Parables series. I believe this is the fourth one in this series. I'm not sure how many more we'll do. If anybody has, because I'm not going to do, there's so many of them. I'm not going to do all of them. The series will go on like forever. So if any of you have any particular parables that I have not covered that you would like me to present, please email me or text me. Email's easiest because then I've got it on the computer, but either way, and make a suggestion and I will endeavor to do that. Also, if there's a series in line with things that I know about, and you would like to suggest a series on a particular topic, please do that too. Please email me or text me with those ideas as well. I appreciate it. And so I kind of want to try with these series to present enough that you kind of have some work, some information to work with on the particular series. And then if you want to explore that more on your own, you can. But I don't want to drag any of them on so long that it's more information than you want or are interested in, and you lose interest. So if you would let me know any particular ideas you have on which ones you'd like to see or which topics you might like to see in a future series, that would be great. All right, so we're going to get started here with our candle lighting. Oops, that one went out. Let's try that again. Shabbat. Okie doke. So the first one we're going to do is there's several of Yeshua's things, several of his parables, several of his teachings have to do with light. And speaking of light, I'm going to make one quick adjustment. So hold on. That was really for me, not for you, so I can see a little better here. Anyway, so these are ones about the light on a lampstand, and there are a number of references to that. So this is from the first, I think you know from now by studying with me or on your own, but the order that things are presented in the New Testament, the Gospels and the letters and whatnot we have in the New Testament. In most Western versions of the New Testament, there are 27 books altogether, and they're presented what you would think would be chronologically from beginning to end, but they're not chronological at all. And for example, of the four Gospels, if you look in your Bible, they're presented in the order of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They were not written in that order. All biblical scholars know that. There's some disagreement about exactly when they were written and by whom, because the authorship of the Gospels is not claimed in the Gospels themselves. It's by oral tradition. But there's very much an agreement on which order they were written in. And Mark was the first one by far. It was the earliest Gospel written that we have. And then Matthew, and then Luke, and then John. And as far as that goes, all four of those Gospels were written substantially later than the letters of Paul, at least 7 of the letters of Paul that appear in the New Testament. Those were the earliest biblical testimonies of Jesus that we have, are those first 7 letters of Paul. And in them we learn nothing about his life and nothing about his teachings and nothing about where he did or what he did or any of that. All we learn about in Paul of Jesus is his birth, which was miraculous, and his death, which was to save all the world from its sin, and he was the one and only Redeemer of all time. That's it. That's all we learn about from Paul. So I'm presenting the Gospel of Mark first in this particular parable because it was the earliest appearance of this parable in the Bible. So this is Mark chapter 4, verse 21. And he was saying to them, he being Yeshua or Jesus, a lamp is not brought to be put under a basket or under a bed, is it? Is it not brought to be put upon the lampstand? For nothing is hidden except to be revealed, nor has anything been secret except that it would come to light. So that's the first version of it. And usually when that's quoted, they leave off the last line that I just read to you. They just read the first one. A lamp is not brought to be put under a basket or under a bed, is it? Is it not brought to be put on a lampstand? And they stop there. God, in Matthew's Gospel, the same story is just a bit different. You are the light of the world. So now we definitely have the lampstand being a metaphor for us. You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden, meaning it's up there, high up there, and in plain view of everyone, like a lamp on a tall lampstand. Most of the lamps, mine's actually downstairs at the moment, most of the lamps in those days were oil lamps. They were little tiny lamps that had kind of a pot at one end and then kind of a long, elongated nose at the other end. They looked like an Aladdin lamp, basically, but they were usually clay. And they would be filled with oil, hence the big spot you could take a lid off and pour the oil in, which would fill up the whole thing, including through the extension. And then at the end of the extension was a little wick that you could float in there and light. And because of the base of oil, that wick would continue to burn. That was the lamp. They were not very bright, and they were never set on the floor because they didn't provide much illumination. They always had to be put up on a counter or a flat surface or a shelf or a lampstand. So that's what Yeshua was talking about. But this one says, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people, here's the lamp part, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket or bushel, but upon the lampstand, so that it may give light to all in the house. Now this parallels the first sentence of Mark, but it leaves off the entire last one, which I'll come back to in a moment. Then Luke, which is even later, is very similar to Matthew's version. No one lights a lamp and then covers it with any kind of container or puts it under their bed. They put it high on the lampstand so that all those who come may see the light. So that's a very, very similar version. And then a bit later in Luke, just 3 chapters later, it's repeated essentially. And this is now Luke 11. The other was Luke 8. No one lights a lamp and puts it away in a cellar or under a basket, but upon the lampstand, so that all those who enter may see the light. So you have the idea in all of those that, this does not appear in the Gospel of John, by the way. You have the idea in all of those that the light is lit not to be hidden. It's not lit to be tucked away in a cellar or in a closet or under a bed or, on the floor, or to be put under something where it can't be seen. It's there to provide illumination. And so providing it a place of illumination, like on a lampstand, that's the purpose of having that light lit, is to provide light. And so the kind of differences in these parables are that Matthew makes a point of saying that we're that light. We're to be like that light in the world. The light that we are and the light that we have is not to be hidden away in a cellar where only a few people in the family or close friends might ever see it. It's to be brought out and set up on a hill in plain sight of everyone, so that the world can see it. That the light that we are is not meant to be confined to a particular area or or protected and shaded, somehow it's supposed to be brought forward. And the idea is that we are to be that light in the world. And to do that, we have to bring forward our light. We have to be willing to let it be seen in the world and not hide it. We have to be willing to reveal that. And that's kind of what all these parables, I think, are pointing to. But there's an interesting difference that's lost in every other version except the original, which is Mark's. And in that version, there's a little bit different twist to it. He doesn't say that it's put up there so that everybody can see it. He doesn't say that it's put up there to provide illumination for everybody, even though he talks about not hiding it. What follows that about it needs to be put on the lampstand. What follows that is because nothing is hidden that is not going to be revealed. This is a teaching that's not in any of those other parables that just followed. That things that are hidden are going to come to light. And then the second part of that says, nor is anything secret that will not come to light. So part of that, I mean, who knows exactly what that means, but part of that, I think there are hints that we can take from that. And I think one of them is that all of the things about ourselves that we try to hide from and think that we are successfully hiding from others, maybe we are, we're not hiding from God. All of those things are revealed to God, and all of those things are going to be revealed, eventually even in the world. And that we also need to be unafraid to look at those things in ourselves. We need to bring that light to bear in ourselves too, and not hide parts of ourselves from that light, but be willing to look at the so-called shadow side of ourselves, the dark side, the good urge, the bad urge, all those parts of us, the duality of us. We need to not be afraid to look at that. And then I think the other part is that secrets are only secrets for a time and then they're revealed. These days, with the advent of the internet and the capability of government and commercial agencies to spy on anything you do practically, the reality of privacy is very different than what our thought about privacy is for the most part. So already a great deal of things that we think are private are not private. But in addition to that, I think there's a social and political component to that, in that you can only get away with hiding bad stuff you do for so long. And we've talked before briefly about some of the corruption and abuse and things that are going on in the world by people in power, not just in our country, but worldwide. And have you not also noticed that at various times these things come to light and people are revealed to have done stuff that they claimed not to be doing or never to have done, that are often the very thing that they're charging their opponents with doing, they themselves are doing, and eventually it comes to light that they're doing this. It's a very, very common tactic, particularly in politics, to blame the other guy or the other party or the other, whoever it might be, the other, to blame them and accuse them of all these different things that in fact the accuser is doing. So I think that's part of this as well, is even those things come to light. Life is set up in such a way that truth proves itself and eventually comes out. So I think that's another aspect of these parables that the latter versions of them kind of don't touch on. They just talk about, revealing the light that you are, which is great. But that light has to be real and not a pretense, and not I'm just this light and I've never done any yucky stuff, never had bad thoughts, never have to deal with anything. I'm just this holy bright light all the time. But in acknowledging our own human struggles and frailties, that we also have to acknowledge the light that is in the midst of all that, and it is never extinguished by any of those failures that we have. So, because if people, one of the problems, like in Christianity, for example, is that the typical Christian understanding of Christ is that Jesus was the one and only Son of God for all time. And this is not all Christians, but this is kind of the main thing that many of them believe, that he was the perfect, that he never made any mistakes, he never had any doubts, he never had any fears, he never got angry, he never did any of those human things because he was God, and he was always perfect. Everything he did was perfect, he always knew he was perfect, and he always knew just what to do, and he was never confused or afraid or selfish or angry or upset. And if we accept that as the model, then it's not much of a model for us, because how many of you can do that? I absolutely can't. And try as I might, I always fail in some aspect of that. And I always have, and I expect I always will, because of this dual nature that in the body, in this physical world, we all carry, as did he. So I think I think having heroes, if you will, models, way showers, that are also human with the same frailties, the same fears, difficulties, challenges that we face, and yet they persevere, and yet they overcome them, and yet they do these great works in spite of those things or in the midst of those things. To me, that's far more encouraging than some god that's come down from Mount Olympus or somewhere that is flawless and does everything just right, and then that's the standard I now have to meet. That's, to me, kind of hopeless and frustrating. So I like this idea. For me, I like it. It's comforting to think that not only is it good that we reveal our light, it's good that it be true, that we present ourselves in the true light of who we really are, and not who we're trying to pretend to be or impress somebody to be, or trying to hide from ourselves even, that we have these difficulties that we're working with. So that's those versions of the lamp on the lampstand, and why they needed a lampstand. One little other historical tidbit along that line, we'll move on to the next parable, is that both in the tabernacle of Moses during the days in the wilderness, where the tabernacle was temporary because they kept moving, it was basically a large tent with various curtains, and the temple in Jerusalem, both the first and second permanent temple, there is no temple there now, in Jerusalem, those temples had a sanctuary that preceded the Holy of Holies itself, which was the innermost part of the temple. And in that sanctuary, there were a number of things, and one of them was a lampstand, and then the lamp holder, which was called the menorah. And in the temple, it had 7 flames that it held. In the temple, originally, it was an oil-based, not a wax candle like this or a tallow candle. It was oil, olive oil, and you've probably seen the menorahs, but they have a central column, and then 3 branches that come up on the left and 3 branches that come up on the right, and then this central column. So the central column is 1 candle, then 3 to the left and right. So there's a total of 7 candles. Sometimes they were flat across, sometimes they were arched or pointed, however you want to think of it. And they were relatively small, and little bits of oil were put in these cups. They look like almond buds in the Torah. They were described that way. And then they dropped a little floaty wick in there and lit it. So that was the lampstand in the sanctuary, and they had 7 of them because, as I said, little bitty oil lamps don't provide a lot of light. So 7 was a sufficient amount of light, to illuminate that room fairly well. And in some drawings and renditions, they were kind of small menorahs like you might have in your home now, some of you. And in some, they were very big. They stood up as tall as me or taller, the stand itself, and then the candles way up. Because the room was huge. The room was like 30 feet tall. So that's another lamp and lampstand that was a common image to them. So, okay, so changing gears here. The next parable is, as I've said, these have slightly different names depending on which Bible rendition you read, because they weren't given names by Yeshua. This is usually called the parable of the wise and foolish servants. And this version is in Luke 12. Luke 12 is rather a long chapter. And there's a number of parables in it, all in a row. This one starts at verse 35. The main part of the parable doesn't start till verse 42, but verse 35 is kind of the setup for it. So this is now Yeshua talking, and he's talking to his apostles. And he says, and as we've said before, the parables were usually used in public, sometimes in public with the disciples present, sometimes in public without many of the disciples present, and very rarely in private with the disciples. More often it was presented in public, and then in private the disciples asked for clarification, or Yeshua asked them what they understood of it. So Luke 12:35. Be dressed and ready for service, and keep your lamps burning. So now here we have the lamps again. Keep that light alive and burning. And then this reference would have been a common one to them, to the Jews of his era. Not common to us, at least most of us. I don't know of any of you that have full-time live-in servants in your home. I do know people like that, but I know a couple of those, but I don't know anybody here like that. Anyway, here's the part about the servants. And keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet. So now this idea is, which was really common. Slavery was common back then, and servant does not necessarily mean slave, by the way. Occasionally it does, but more often it means servant, somebody who's employed in the home. And again, once again, we're always taught that Yeshua and all of his followers were these tremendously dirt poor people. Dirt poor people don't have servants, and he uses the example of masters and servants quite a bit, so it had to be fairly familiar to them. Anyway, like servants waiting for their master to return from a wedding banquet, so that when he comes home and knocks, they can immediately open the door to him. Again, many poorer homes had no doors. They had open holes up for windows with no screens, no glass. Sometimes they had shutters, depending on the part of the country they lived in and whatnot. And many of them had no door. They literally had an opening. Sometimes they hang a curtain over it. Sometimes there was a door. Sometimes there was a wooden door. The wealthier homes always had doors. And in the wealthier homes in particular, and in the era when Yeshua lived under Roman military occupation, almost everybody barred their doors. If they had doors, they barred their doors at night as a safety measure. So locking your home up before you go to bed was something not uncommon to them either. And so and they didn't have key, most of them, it was very, very, very rare to have key locks. If they had any locks, it was usually a carpentry made, a tongue and groove type wooden latching system that would latch the door, but wasn't able to be locked. It would be unlatched. So anyway, it would, so that the servants can immediately open the door for him when the master arrives. They don't know what time the master is coming back from the banquet, so they have to be ready, and the house has to be illuminated. And then when he knocks, they have to let him in, and the house has to be lit up. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes. Truly I tell you, we've mentioned this before, that phrase in English, it's actually usually translated amen in the Greek and Hebrew, means pay attention, this is important. Truly I tell you, he will then, meaning the master will then dress himself to serve and have them recline with him at the table, and then will come and wait on them. So this is different. First of all, like Roman tradition, the people in that era, being under Roman occupation for so long, typically dined reclining on the floor, usually on a mat or rug of some kind, and usually not sitting up like at a low Japanese table, but food items on the floor too, in bowls, plates, whatever, on the mat, and then you would kind of lie down on the floor and eat reclining. That was not uncommon. What was uncommon is now when the master gets home, if he finds the house lit and the servants attentive and waiting for him and they open the door for him, then he's going to dress himself to serve them, and he invites them to join him at his table, which that didn't happen. And he serves them. The master serves the servants. This is a big turnaround in the parable. Yeshua is always doing that, as I've said before. That's not what people expected to hear. The master is waiting on the servant. That concept we see a great deal in the ministry of Jesus, that he's trying to drum it into his disciples' heads, that they're being his apostles, even they're being lords over the 12 tribes and the nations of the world, which he says will happen one day. That's not an exalted position, that's a position of service, that the master is there to serve. One of the last things Yeshua does before his arrest and crucifixion, at the Last Supper and before they eat, is he personally gets a towel and a basin and literally washes, by himself, washes the feet of all the apostles and others gathered for the Last Supper. A very humbling act and intentional demonstration of that the greatest among you shall be your servant concept. So he's doing that in this parable as well. Okay, so he's now going to serve and wait on them. It will be good then if those servants are found by the master to be ready, even if he shows up in the middle of the night or not until daybreak. So you don't know they don't know when he's coming home, so they have to be ready. Understand this: if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. That's an odd thing to put there. You must also likewise be ready, because you don't know when your master is coming. You don't know when to expect him. So that's the end of that part. And now more is going to follow. So Simon Peter, says, Lord, are you telling this parable to us or to everyone? So now he's making that same distinction I've talked about. Is this a parable you mean for everybody? Or are you talking just about us? Are you talking about your disciples? We need to be ready. We have to keep the lamp lit. We have to be ready all the time. You mean everybody needs to do that? Or are you talking about just us? Because he wants to be clear about that. And Yeshua says to him, whoever is a faithful steward, whom his master will put in charge of other servants, they must be willing to provide rations and care for them at the proper time. So now he's adding this part of these apostles. He's not saying I'm just telling you, but his answer indicates, yes, I'm just telling you guys this. Because what he's saying is he's going to put them in charge of other people, which he did. So the apostles were then in charge of other people in his ministry who had other roles of service and administration. And you have to care for them at the proper time. So this is training, in other words, for you to learn how to become a good master yourself and to care for the people that you're overseeing and supervising and directing. Blessed is the slave whom his master finds attentive when he comes. Truly I say to you, there it is again, that he will then, the master, will then put him, the faithful servant or steward. Truly then I say to you that the master will put the faithful steward in charge of all that he has. So that's one of the parables. Then there's another part of that he goes on to explain. And the idea, again, is that my idea of this is that one of the things Yeshua is doing here is telling his apostles they needed to learn how to be a good master. They needed to learn how to serve the people that they were teaching, learn how to be of service to the people that they were mentoring, learn how to be of service to the people that they were overseeing in the ministry and the work, and to be good masters, so to speak. Then he continues and gives another example. Now, this is all still part of the same section here. Yeshua says, however, if the servant says in his heart, my master is taking a long time to come, and so in his master's absence, he begins to beat the other slaves who are subservient to him, both men and women, which made it more horrific because you didn't beat women. Men tended to do that. Women, that was a no-no. And the servant indulges himself in the master's eat and drinks to the point of getting drunk. So now you have this unfaithful servant who's abusing the other servants in his charge, who is drinking the master's wine and eating his food to the point of getting drunk. And then the master of that slave comes home at a time that slave does not expect, at an hour that he cannot anticipate. The master will cut him in two. This is the calm, peaceful Yeshua that, everybody thinks is always a meek guy, telling a story about the unfaithful servant being cut in half. That's not exactly a peaceful image. And then the master will assign him a place with the unbelievers. That slave who knew his master's will and yet did not act on it will receive many blows. But the servant who did not understand his master's will and not understanding committed such acts will not receive a beating. From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be asked. To whom has been entrusted much, even more will be asked. So there's a lot in this parable. In this part of it, again, he's talking about people who are you not aware of in our own time, people who come to positions of power. I don't just mean politically, that as well. People who come to social power as a celebrity of some kind in sports or Hollywood or music or whatever it may be. They come to a position of power. People who come to a position of political power. People, sadly, who come to a position of spiritual power in terms of leadership of a synagogue or a church or an organization of some kind, and attain a great deal of authority over that spiritual body of people. Sad to say, but are you not aware of people even in those positions who have abused those positions, who have become corrupted by their own selfish lusts and greed and desires, and misuse that to the point of treating other people in their care terribly, to not taking care of the people they're supposed to be serving, to lording it over the people they're supposed to be helping, to abusing the people in their care. This is still going on. This very thing that Yeshua was talking about over 2,000 years ago is still going on. And so, to me, this is what he's talking about, this kind of thing, and trying to make it very clear to the apostles. Don't do this. When you become recognized as one of mine, when you become recognized as a spiritual authority, as a spiritual leader, as a leader in your community, as somebody with power and influence over others, do not behave like this. And while you're being entrusted by me to grow into this position, don't behave like the unfaithful servant. Continue to be faithful to what I'm asking you to do. Continue to honor what I'm asking you to do. And when you step into my kind of position, continue to treat the people that you're working with well and help them to understand the importance of honoring this teaching, this way of living, and to come to know and honor the will of God. I think that that's an important part of this parable. And I think it's interesting that he's making another important distinction, and that is that you cannot be responsible for what you don't know. So the servant who understood what his master wanted and what was being asked of him, and then knowing that, chose not to do it, that servant gets the punishment. The servant who did the same thing, not understanding the master's will, not understanding that he wasn't supposed to be doing this, doesn't get that. Same action, different intentions, different understanding, and therefore different consequences to the very same action. So that's something, that concept is something we've talked about before in other classes. And I think there's an idea, a kind of a teaching, if you will, that maybe you haven't heard it. I kind of hope you haven't, but in many spiritual circles in the last 10 to 15, I don't know, 20 years or so, in the circles I've moved in, as people talk about karma, they don't really talk about it in the sense that it originally was intended in the Eastern writings, which is where the term comes from in Sanskrit. They put other definitions on what karma is, and the idea is that one of the things they teach is that if you do certain things, you're going to have karmic repercussions from this. Meaning usually meaning in a negative sense. You do this, bad stuff's going to happen to you. And one of the differences with Kabbalistic teachings, for example, there's a phrase in Kabbalah that says the intention is the act. The intention is called kavanah in Hebrew. And it's trying, I think, to get at the same idea of it's not just the action that determines the consequences of what happens. It's the intention and motivation and understanding behind it. So if a little child is playing and picks up a rock and throws it at somebody, or picks up a stick and whacks somebody with it, and they're at such a young age, they don't grasp the damage that can cause. That's different than if a 16-year-old does that, who clearly knows, and is probably intending for this to cause injury and harm. Even when you get to really serious things, and this is a bit harder for some people, but I think it's an important moral point to grasp that's sometimes not clearly taught. Even when you get to really serious things, like taking a life, for example, which is probably one of the most serious we can imagine, that's a horrible thing. But interestingly enough, if you have somebody who is intent upon murdering someone for whatever reason, out of revenge, out of desire to get what they have, to steal from them, out of desire to, whatever it might be, they have some benefit from this, either an emotional anger or schemed, planned, then I get the inheritance, then I get control of the business, whatever it might be. And that person actually kills somebody. That's a horrible and horrific act. Then you have somebody else over here who has no such intention whatsoever, none at all. And that person sees their child in the process of being, or their wife or husband or friend, in the process of being murdered by an attacker, and they stop that attacker. And in the process of stopping that attacker, kill them. Now here we have a guy that's been killed, and here we have a guy that's been killed. Same consequences for the one who killed them? No. Not remotely. And yet death was the result in both cases. The Torah, by the way, is very clear on that. The commandment is not, thou shalt not kill, it's thou shalt not commit murder. And it's in Exodus, and I wish I remembered the chapter, but I wasn't planning on talking about this part. It even says, and maybe one of the Bible scholars here can tell me later where it was, but in Exodus it says that if someone breaks into your home in the middle of the night, and you don't know their intent, well, you won't know their intent. If they break into your home in the middle of the night and you kill them, that you have no consequence for that. So there's the, even at that serious level, intention matters, and why and how somebody ends up being killed um, is critical in the consequences to the person who takes that life. And our justice system is based on that very thing. Now, okay, granted, I understand the justice system as is in our country and many others is flawed, and there could be lots of corruption in it. Leaving that aside, the concept of the justice system in England and the United States is that that weighs in the consequence to the intentional murderer and the consequence to the one who does this to protect their own life or the life of someone else and uses deadly force to do so. Very, very different legal consequences because very different moral code there. So even in extreme situations, that distinction of intention applies. And that's one of the things that ancient Judaism taught, and the and most of the Western civilization's moral codes derive from that Jewish moral code. So anyway, the last piece of this, the last line I'm going to repeat again of this parable is, "From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be asked. And to those to whom much has been entrusted, even more will be asked." So again, he's speaking to his apostles here. He's entrusting a great deal to them. His teaching, to bring it forward truthfully and as accurately as possible, to maintain the standards that he set and the teachings that he set, and that for those who have been entrusted with a great deal, more is going to even be expected. And so if as we, those of us who are parents, as we have children, when they're at a certain age, they don't do anything for themselves. We literally feed them, change them, bathe them, we do everything. And then as they age, we entrust them to do more. And at certain ages, we allow them to, for example, pick out maybe their own clothes to go to school as opposed to us dressing them, maybe with some parameters even. And eventually they're picking their own clothes. Maybe they have to eat certain things at a certain age, and then as they age, they have a little more freedom of choice in terms of what they're allowed to and not required to eat, and so on. And socially, they can go places with us, and then eventually they can go places by themselves and with their friends, and then eventually they can borrow the car, and you get the point. Eventually more and more responsibilities are entrusted to them as they mature and demonstrate their trustworthiness. And if they demonstrate their lack of trustworthiness, then some of those things are taken back and not taken from them. But the more we can entrust to someone and see that they're handling it responsibly, then the more we entrust to them. And even at a level that has nothing to do with worldly responsibilities and making good choices. Emotionally, very few of us open the depths of our hearts to strangers. Most of us are slow to develop intimacy with one another. And I'm not talking about physical or sexual intimacy here either. But the human intimacy of my deep desires, my deep fears, my deep hopes, the things that really matter to me, that I rarely talk to most people about, the things that I'm really, really struggling with, the things that I really, really love. The depths of who I am, most of us take time and kind of probe out, is this person safe to entrust this with or not? And we share a little. It's not like super deep, but like here's a bit. And if that's respected and cared for and they treat it carefully, then we give them a little more, and so on. And that's a two-way thing. Hopefully they're doing that with us as well. And eventually you find people, hopefully, you find people that you can trust, really trust, and really open up to, and know that they're not going to use that information as a weapon against you. They're not going to use it to get back at you when they're angry. They're not going to threaten you with it. They're not going to expose your secrets, even if they're not bad secrets, just personal ones, that you don't really want the world to know. they're not going to expose that. They're not going to put it up on the internet. They're not going to tell everybody about it. They're going to keep your confidences. That kind of intimacy takes, in almost all of us, takes time to develop and unfold, and we kind of test the waters, so to speak. Well, spiritually, that's done as well. As God entrusts us to do certain things, if we handle that well, I don't mean without any failures, but I mean with our intentionality and having integrity in terms of trying to do those things, then really spiritually more is revealed to us. And the more that's revealed to us, the servant who didn't know wasn't as responsible, didn't have the consequences. The servant who did know did have the consequences. As more is revealed to you spiritually, and you have a greater wisdom and a greater depth of understanding arising within you, guess what you also have? You also have a greater degree of responsibility now because you have that greater understanding. So more is expected of how you behave, how you speak, how you talk. Some of you are familiar with Baal Shem Tov, who was a famous Jewish mystical leader in the late 1700s in Eastern Europe. And I don't have time to tell it now, but there's a wonderful story about this Shabbat, Friday night, that was ruined for him and his disciples, that they just had a terrible, terrible experience while they were traveling in this particular home, who had put them up for the night. Terrible, terrible, terrible experiences. And it turns out at the end of the story that that was a consequence of the Baal Shem Tov one time in his own home speaking harshly to one of his servant girls who had cooked and was serving dinner for his friends. And he got angry with her and spoke harshly to her. That's it. One time, kind of lost his temper and spoke badly to her. Didn't beat her with clubs, didn't, damage her, just spoke meanly to her. But because he was at such an exalted level of revelation and understanding, he had a much higher responsibility to behave that way. And where somebody else might have just said something short and curt, in a moment of pique, and it kind of was forgotten, that wasn't forgotten. And it had to be pointed out to him in a rather dramatic way. This was beneath you, and this is not what's expected of somebody at your level of understanding. So as we raise in our awareness and deepen in our understanding, we have a corresponding responsibility to speak and behave that way. That people who know less, quite frankly, I know this sounds elitist and I don't mean it that way, but quite honestly, people who know less don't have that same degree of responsibility. Not as much as expected because they don't understand. So that's another piece of this that Yeshua is communicating, is that as you grow in understanding and more is entrusted to you, more is expected of you. And then as you handle that, more is given and even more is expected of you. So, but those, he doesn't say it in this parable, but elsewhere he says the same kind of thing. And he says, for those who are entrusted with little things and they don't do well with them, even those are taken away from them. Whereas if you're entrusted with little things, more is entrusted to you. And the more that you do well with that, the more is entrusted to you. And it's not a preferential treatment, as our egos might be wanting to take that, like, ooh, look at me, I'm doing great because I'm entrusted with all this, or, oh my God, this is so unfair because I'm not entrusted with anything because I'm a screw up. However the ego looks at that, it's not about that. It's really how things are structured so that the best possible outcomes can happen. That, for example, one more example, when I was little, my dad was a fixing guy. He could design and fix lots of stuff. And he had a little workshop with all kinds of tools, 99% of which I had no idea what they did, because I was never a fixing guy. I'm one of the most mechanically inept people probably you'll meet. But anyway, there were certain tools I was allowed to use. As I got older, and he trained me, I could use a hammer. I knew how to hammer nails, and I could do that. I was pretty good at that, actually. I could saw things with one of the hand saws. I could do certain things. He also had some very powerful power tools that I wasn't to touch. not because he thought that I would break them, but because he understood that I wasn't at a level of competency yet to be able to safely use them without damaging me or something else. And then gradually, that's something that, I grew into and was able to use. And then some of them I was so uncomfortable with. I was like, nope, nope, I'm not doing that one. The arc welder, nah, never mind. Somebody else can do that. I'm not doing that. But that's the same kind of thing, is that we grow into our responsibilities. And spiritually, it's no different. We do that as well. So I think that's part of the message of this last parable, is giving examples of to them, of what does it look like to be in a leadership position spiritually. It means paying attention. It means paying attention all the time, day or night, busy, not busy, feeling good, not feeling good, happy, sad. Pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on. Pay attention to how spirit is unfolding. Pay attention to the people around you. Take care of them. Handle your responsibilities. Be faithful to what you say you'll do. All those kinds of things are somewhere in this parable, I think, of trying to convey to him what role is it you're really stepping into and what's going to be expected of you. And those people who are coming after you that you're going to train, what do they need to understand about the role? And how can you help them train to be able to fulfill it? So, because it's always a passing on. This Kabbalah, by the way, the word itself means received. And our spiritual traditions are received. They're passed on. The teachings go from me to you, from you to somebody else, from somebody to me. There's a movement of all of this in families as well. One thing passes down the generations. My great grandmother's recipe is still used in some circles, as probably your mothers or grandmothers are too. There are things that are passed down, and that's how things unfold. So the importance of our being responsible with those things entrusted to us, whether it's a recipe or a spiritual power, is pretty much the same process. And it's important. Again, the last thing trying to convey is, because the ego is so subtle and it's so easy to convince ourselves that we see our own failures, whether we like to admit it to others or not, we see our own failures really clearly. We might then hide from them, but we certainly know them. And sometimes the ego tends to either go, well, you're so stupid, and fail so many times, and are so untrustworthy, and so look at you. How can you possibly think you should ever be in a position of serving anybody in the synagogue or the church or your neighborhood or anywhere? I mean, why in heaven's name would anybody listen to you? Look at the mess you make of everything. And really feel like you're not worthy, that you have nothing to offer because you're a screw up. And on the other hand, going, look at me. Man, I'm terrific. I know everything and I'm great. And I did this and I did that. And look at what people think of me. And look at all this. I'm somebody. And either one of those attitudes, I'm not good enough to be of any service, or because I'm of service, I'm more important than the people I serve. Either one of those attitudes is spiritually devastating. They prevent you from really doing what you're here to do, which is just love each other. And it takes humility to love one another. We can't do that genuinely if we're all caught up in these ego games of I'm not good enough or I'm too good. Neither one of those is true. So those are the parables for this evening, and hopefully you got something out of some of those, or found something inspirational or useful in those, I hope. Just a quick reminder, I know some of you every now and then look at the YouTube posts, but I do record these, and they do go on One by One's YouTube channel, and it's free, so feel free to look at those if you'd like to do that. They've been up there for, I've been posting up there for, I don't know, a year, I want to say. I don't remember when we started. There's a number of them up there. And also I want to mention that tomorrow, on Saturday, from 10 to 12, is the monthly class that Michael Patterson and I do at Unity on sacred relationships. This particular one tomorrow is on the theme of discernment. So if you're in the area, and even if you haven't told us you're coming, you're welcome to show up. I hope you can. And then I will not be there because I have other things going on Sunday, but Unity service is here on 10:30 in the morning on Sunday, and I believe Wanda's the speaker this week, Reverend Wanda, who's wonderful. So if you have a chance, go support her and attend that. And I think that's all for now. So thank you all for joining me tonight. Just take a moment, if you would, and come back into that quiet space inside. And this week, let us be thankful for the teachers we have in our lives, the spiritual teachers that have been in our life in the past and have moved on to another realm, those who are still present, the educational teachers that we had in our life that taught us how to read and to write and to do math and to understand things, how to learn, and the opportunities that we have to pass those teachings on to those who come after us, the physical, practical things and the spiritual things as well. May we be good teachers and help those who come after us to live better than had they not known us. We thank you, Lord, for this community. We thank you for your presence within us and among us, and we ask that you help us to be attentive to that presence throughout the duration of this week in all that we do. We thank you for all the blessings, seen and unseen. Good night for now. Love you all. Hope to see some of you again and locally, and then the rest of you hopefully next Friday. All right. Bye for now.